स्टूडेंट्स, हाउ आर यू ऑल। लास्ट वीडियो में हमने डिस्कस कर लिए थे अपने चैप्टर नंबर 5 तक, जिसमें कि आपने इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस, वर्ल्ड ऑर्गेनाइजेशन एंड बहुत सारी चीज़ें जो है वो डिस्कस कर लिया था। ठीक है, हिस्ट्री एंड पॉलिटी दोनों ही चीज़ें, पॉलिटिकल सिचुएशन पहले कब क्या थी अब क्या है। नाउ अब कंसर्न जो है एनवायरनमेंट पे देते हैं, फिर अभी जो ट्रेंड में ग्लोबलाइजेशन है उस पे देंगे। ओके, तो दो टॉपिक्स हम डिस्कस करेंगे। ये आएगा 6 मार्क्स का और वो जो ग्लोबलाइजेशन है वो 4 मार्क्स का। तो 10 मार्क्स का जो कंटेंट है वो अभी हम डिस्कस करेंगे। ठीक है, इतना ही जो है पढ़ने के बाद आपके 10 मार्क्स पक्के। Environment and natural resources. Earlier, environmental issues were not taken very seriously. However, since the 1960s, the issue of the environment has gained momentum. Now, various countries are ready to engage in discussions on the environmental matters. Various problems in the environment, like arable land, is and fodder in pastures running, fish stocks are declining, water pollution is increasing, water scarcity is worsening, and there is a decline in production also. Developing countries lack access to clean drinking water. There is rampant deforestation, and biodiversity is being severely harmed, and the ozone layer is developing holes. How environment is political topic. These environmental issues can only be resolved by the government, because ये environment की बात अगर मैं और आप करेंगे तो नहीं होगा, इसके लिए तो गवर्नमेंट डिस्कस करेगी. A group of scholars known as the Club of Rome wrote a book titled Limited to the Growth in 1972. Limits to Growth in 1972. This book illustrated how increasing population is depleting the resources. UNEP, that is United Nations Environmental Program, has organized Rio Summit in 1992, Earth Summit. In 1992, the Rio conference was held in Brazil. कहाँ पे हुआ था ये? ब्राज़ील में. It was a United Nations conference on environmental and development. 170 countries participated in that. Okay, NGOs, MNCs, etc. all involved. 5 years before the Rio summit in 1987, a report titled Our Common Future was published. And this report stated that the current methods of economic development would not prove to be sustainable in the long run. And the demand for the industrial development is much stronger in the southern part of the world. 5 years before the Rio summit in 1987, a report titled Our Common Future was published. And this report stated that the current methods of economic development would not prove to be sustainable in the long run. And the demand for the industrial development is much stronger in the southern part of the world. यहाँ पे दिखा रखा है डेवलप्ड जो थे वो रिच, एंड ये जो डेवलपिंग है ये पुअर. ठीक है, तो ये साउथ में और नॉर्थ में इधर रिच डेवलप्ड और ये पुअर डेवलपिंग स्टेज में. At the Rio summit, it became clearly evident that the countries of the northern and southern hemisphere face different problems and challenges. Northern hemisphere countries developed and wealthy nations. Southern hemisphere countries poor and developing nations. So main concerns of the northern hemisphere क्या था? Ozone layer depletion and global warming. And जो main concerns था southern hemisphere का economic development and eradicating poverty, environmental management. ये सारी चीजें. At the Rio summit, certain protocols were established concerning climate change, biodiversity, and forestry. Some measures for the development were proposed in the form of Agenda 21, and the conference reached a consensus that the model of economic growth should be such that it does not harm the environment, and this was referred to as the path of the sustainable development. However, some critics argue that Agenda 21 leans more towards the economic growth than the environmental protection and the common heritage of the world. Common heritage refers to those resources that are not owned by any single individuals but belong to the entire communities. Examples हो जाएगा इसका pastures, open fields and wells and rivers etc. Global commons or the shared heritage of humanity क्या है? Certain parts and regions of the world fall outside the jurisdiction of any single country. Therefore, their management carried out collectively by the international community, and these are referred to as the global commons or the shared heritage of humanity. Example है इसका the atmosphere and outer space and Antarctica and the ocean floor etc. Treaties for the protection of global communities, global commons, Antarctic Treaty 1959 में, Montreal Protocol 1987 में, Antarctic Environmental Protocol 1991 में. Developed countries of the northern hemisphere want to discuss the environment in terms of its present state. इसके बाद क्या है ये, दीज कंट्रीज एडवोकेट फॉर द इक्वल पार्टिसिपेशन फ्रॉम ऑल द नेशंस इन द एनवायरमेंटल प्रोटेक्शन. However, developing countries of southern hemisphere argue that developed nations have caused more damage to the environment. Therefore, they believe that developed nations should bear a greater share of the responsibilities for addressing that damage. And developing countries are still going through the process of industrialization, therefore restrictions should not imposed on them. For this reason, it was proposed and accepted at the 1992 Rio summit that this principle be recognized as common but differentiated responsibilities. United Nations Framework Convention, UNFCCC, 1992. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, 1992 addresses climate change related issues. ठीक है, अब उसके बाद हम बात करते हैं ग्लोबलाइजेशन की. फ्लो और मूवमेंट होता है ये. फ्लो कैन टेकन इन मैनी फॉर्म्स, फ्लो कैन टेक इन मैनी फॉर्म्स लाइक स्प्रेड ऑफ आइडियाज, मूवमेंट ऑफ गुड्स, ट्रांसफर ऑफ कैपिटल, माइग्रेशन ऑफ पीपल. नाउ due to globalization, there has been significant advancement in the field of technology, like invention of the telephone, invention of the telegraph, development of the printing technology. Role of technology in globalization. Events occurring in one part of the world are not only known quickly elsewhere, but also have an impact on the other regions. दूसरी जगहों पे सिर्फ वो खबरें फैलती नहीं है, बल्कि उसका इम्पैक्ट भी देखने को मिलता है. लाइक अभी जैन जी क्या कर रही है, कहाँ कहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है, एवरीथिंग. पॉलिटिकल impact of globalization. In developing countries, the role of the state is highly significant because these nations face numerous challenges such as poverty, unemployment, lack of health care, inadequate education. Solving these problems is considered the primary duty of the state. That's why the state is usually structured as a welfare state. The power of the state has diminished, and the concept of a welfare state has been replaced by that of the minimal intervention state. The state now limits itself to only a few core functions such as maintaining law and order and ensuring the security of its citizens. The state now pays less attention to welfare activities. In place of the state, the market has now become the primary determinant of economic and social priorities. With the arrival of multinational companies, abilities of governments in developing countries make independent decisions has weakened. However, it is also true that as a result of globalization, states now have access to advanced technologies which allow them to gather all kinds of information about their citizens and functions more effectively and efficiently. उसके बाद क्या है ये इकोनॉमिक इफेक्ट्स ऑफ ग्लोबलाइजेशन. ग्लोबलाइजेशन हैज लेड overall increase in the global trade because earlier times import restrictions are no longer heavily imposed, and there has been a rise in the movement of capital, allowing investors to invest their money in any country, especially in developing nations where they see higher profit potential. There has also been a wider spread of ideas along with the expansion of internet and computer related services. Developed countries are making the visa policies more stringent. Privatization and capitalism are being encouraged. Millions of people are getting employment opportunities. Market competition is increasing, and products from the various countries are now easily available in the market. Now let's talk about the cultural effects of the globalization. So changes in the food habits, changes in the lifestyles, erosion of the traditional cultures, increasing inclination towards the American culture, mixed impact on the status of women, both decline and improvement. Interest in the foreign films, festivals, and music is increasing. Orthodox traditions are fading away. There is a noticeable change in the people's thinking. Foreign cultures have spread more widely. How globalization has impacted India. Economic growth की बात करें तो India has experienced significant economic expansion with increased foreign investment and growth in the sectors like IT and services. Job opportunities की बात करें तो globalization has created employment especially in urban areas and industries such as BPOs and tech. कल्चरल इन्फ्लुएंस की बात करें तो वेस्टर्न लाइफस्टाइल, फूड हैबिट्स, फैशन एंड मीडिया हैव बिकम मोर प्रोमिनेंट. कंज्यूमर एक्सेस की बात करें तो Indian consumers now have access to a wide range of global products and services. Privatization and liberalization की बात करें तो economic reforms have led to greater private sector participation and a more open economy. Education and awareness, तो ये ग्लोबलाइजेशन की वजह से एक्सपोजर टू द ग्लोबल आइडियाज एंड एजुकेशनल मॉडल्स हैज इंक्रीज्ड अमंग द इंडियन youth. And social change, there has been both positive reforms and concern over the cultural erosions. Attracting foreign investments, India started giving special benefits to the foreign companies to invest here. And examples है इसका, it created special economic zones SEZs where companies get tax cuts and better facilities. This is special economic zones. Now supporting developing countries, India believes that developing countries should get fair treatment in the global economy. That's why India often speaks up in international meetings to protect their interests. उसके बाद है global impact. India has influenced how globalization works by sharing its views and helping to shape the rules that affect the trade and development for the poorest nations. Cultural homogenization and cultural diversification. Cultural homogenization means the spreading of Western culture across the world. And today, the spread of Western culture is happening so rapidly that it is starting to form a kind of global culture. Now, cultural diversification. When different culture mix with each other, they learn from one another but still keep their own special identity. This mixing makes every culture more unique and colorful. Movements against the globalization. Many anti-globalization movements have been launched, but these were mostly protests against the specific actions that were seen as forms of modern imperialism. In 1999, during a World Trade Organization, that is WTO, ministerial meetings in Seattle, people protested against the unfair trade practices adopted by the economically powerful nations. The World Social Forum brought together human rights activists and environmentalists, workers and youth and others. These meetings have been held in Brazil, Mumbai, in Miami and Kenya, among the other places. Resistance to the globalization. So, leftist thinkers argue that modern globalization is a form of global capitalism that mainly benefits the rich, making them richer, while the poor become even more poorer. Right wing criticism of globalization क्या कहते हैं? Right wing critics are concerned about the political, economic, and cultural impacts of the globalization. They argue that political weakening of the state harms the general public. According to them, a certain level of economic self reliance is necessary, at least in some key areas. They also believe that globalization has damaged traditional cultures. उसके बाद next क्या है? Western culture is being imposed in the world. Cultures around the globe are increasingly being shaped to fit the American culture. As a result, ancient culture heritage is slowly disappearing. Therefore, this is not just a threat to the poor countries but a danger to all of humanity. Globalization has reduced the power and capacity of the states. Now, the concepts of the welfare state has been replaced by the idea of a minimal intervention state, and the state now limits itself to only a few main functions such as maintaining law and order and providing security to its citizens. India and resistance to the globalization. The Indian social form and the leftist groups have opposed economic globalization. Industrial workers and farmers organizations have protested against multinational companies. Therefore has been strong opposition to the patenting of name by American and European firms. ठीक है? Right wing groups have registered the cultural impacts such as the celebration of Valentine's Day, viewing it as a threat to the traditional Indian values. हम लास्ट चैप्टर जो 6 मार्क्स का डिस्कस कर रहे थे ना, हम यहाँ पे क्या डिस्कस कर रहे थे हम यहाँ पे डिस्कस कर रहे थे The United Nations Framework Convention on the Climate Change UNFCCC 1992 addresses climate change related the issues. ठीक है, अब इसको हम आगे कंटिन्यू करते हैं. तो यहाँ पे है UNFCCC 1992. It states that the countries accepting this treaty will, in accordance with their capabilities and their contribution to the environmental degradation, take common but differentiated responsibilities to work towards the protection of the environment. And the countries that accepted this convention agreed that both historically and in the present, developed countries have played the biggest role in the emission of the greenhouse gases. countries have a lower per capita emission rate. For this reason, countries like China, India, and other developing nations were exempted from the binding obligation of the Kyoto Protocol. अब हम बात करते हैं Kyoto Protocol की. So the Kyoto Protocol is an international agreement. Under this protocol, specific targets were set for the industrialized countries to reduce the emission of the greenhouse gases, and these include gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, and hydrofluorocarbon, which are believed to play a significant role in contributing to global warming. ठीक है. उसके बाद जो नेक्स्ट है वो क्या है? Sacred groves. Certain parts of the forests are considered sacred and are therefore not cut down. It is believed that deities reside in these areas. These are sacred groves. Such places are often found in the villages, and these sacred groves are known by the different names in different states. In Rajasthan, this is Vani. Jharkhand में जहरा, थान एंड सरना. मेघालय में लियोंदो. केरला में काऊ. उत्तराखंड में थान और देवभूमि. महाराष्ट्र में देव राहतीज. India stand on environmental issues, and India signed the Kyoto Protocol in 2002. It is believed that India and China will soon be among the leading emitters of greenhouse gases. India maintains that the primary responsibility for the reducing greenhouse gas emissions should lie with the developed countries. India's greenhouse gas emissions were 0.9 tons per capita by 2000 year and are projected to rise to 1.6 tons per capita by 2030. Steps taken by the government of India to protect the environment. India revised its national auto fuel policy, and the use of clean fuels was made mandatory in India. Vehicles began running on CNG, compressed natural gas, and the Energy Conservation Act was passed in 2001. ठीक है. The Electricity Act was enacted in 2003. The use of clean coal began to be promoted. The use of biodiesel was approved, and electric vehicles were given the green light. LPG जो cooking gas है was encouraged for the wider use. Environmental movements की अगर हम बात करें, so there are individuals who are conscious and aware about the environment. People who want to protect the environment from harm. Such individuals have launched movements for the environmental conservation. These movements have taken place at both national and international levels. Today, environmental movement across the world have become vibrant, diverse, and powerful. These movements have been carried out in different countries, focusing on the various issues. For example, against deforestation, Chile, Indonesia, India; against mining, southern hemisphere countries; against dams, Australia; against multinational corporations in various countries. In southern countries like Mexico, Chile, Brazil, Malaysia, Indonesia, Africa, and India, forest movements have taken places, and these movements were centered around opposition to deforestation. For this reason, mining industries have faced criticism and opposition in many parts of the world. Example, in the Philippines, several groups and organizations jointly launched a campaign against the Australian multinational company Western Mining Corporation. Some movements have also opposed to construction of large dams. These anti-dam movements are often seen as efforts to have rivers. In the early to mid 1980s, the world's first major anti-dam movement took place in the southern hemisphere, and the movement in Australia aimed to protect the Franklin River and the surrounding forests. In the countries of the southern hemisphere, from Turkey to Thailand and South Africa, and from Indonesia to China, there is a growing race to construct large dams. In India, two anti-dam movements has been carried out. One notable example is in the Narmada Bachao Andolan. Politics of resources. Different types of resources are found in the various regions across the world. Conflicts over these resources have existed since ancient times. Some countries possess mineral resources while others have all reserves. Some nations are rich in timber and others have rivers, mountains, and rocks. Some countries possess trees, vegetation, animals, water, and other natural resources. The global expansion of European was primarily driven by the quest for the resources. Timber and oil resources have always great importance. Control over petroleum has consistently been a strategic objective. There have been ongoing efforts to dominate the oil resources of the Gulf countries. Now let's talk about the Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the largest oil producing country in the world, followed by Iraq, which ranks second. Water is also a vital resource. Life cannot exist without water. In some parts of the world, clean drinking water is not readily available. As a result, water resources can become a root cause of the conflict. It is often believed believed that the Third World War could be fought for the water war. Countries located near the water sources are sometimes known to misuse of overexploit them. There have also been violent clashes over the water. Examples: in the 1950s and 1960s, wars occurred between the Israel, Syria, and Jordan over water issues. The Euphrates River water dispute involved Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Indigenous peoples are considered the descendants of those who have been living in particular region, often existing country for a very long time. Later, people from other countries with different cultural or ethnic backgrounds arrived and enslaved these native populations. Even today, indigenous people continue to live according to their own traditional culture and customs, and they follow a unique way of life that is distinct and deeply rooted in their heritage. Indigenous people live all around the world, and there are some similarities in their way of life, culture, and traditions, and they play great importance on preserving their traditional heritage. And there are 300 million indigenous people in the world, Philippines 2 million indigenous people, and Chile Mapuche 1 million, Bangladesh 600,000, North America में 3,50,000, एंड नॉर्दर्न सोवियत रीजन में 1 मिलियन. प्रॉब्लम्स एंड राइट्स की अगर हम बात करें तो स्ट्रगल फॉर द इक्वलिटी, स्ट्रगल फॉर द डेवलपमेंट, डिमांड फॉर द इंडिपेंडेंट आइडेंटिटी एंड demand for the independent identity for the indigenous people, demand for the rights over the indigenous lands, demand to stop the destruction of the forests, demand to prevent the interference in their way of life. देखो ये सारी चीज़ें जो है हर जगह पे भी थी, मतलब इंटरनेट पे थी, इतनी सारी किताबों में थी, इतनी सारी जो हेल्प बुक होती है उनमें भी थी, बट फिर भी मैंने हैंड रिटन जो है सब कुछ लिखा. क्यों? क्योंकि एक चीज़ को आप 10 बार पढ़ोगे ना तब जाके ज़्यादा आपको क्लैरिटी होगी एज़ कम्पेयर टू कि 10 बुक्स को जो है आप एक आध बार जो है पढ़ रहे हो. ठीक है, तो इसलिए हैंड रिटन नोट्स जो है होना बहुत ज़रूरी होते हैं, चाहे वो आपके बोर्ड के एग्जाम्स हो, चाहे वो यूपीएससी के मीन्स रिटन एग्जाम्स हो. हर चीज़ के लिए आपके जो है रिटन नोट्स का मुकाबला जो है कोई कुछ भी नहीं कर सकता. बार बार रिवीजन इज़ द की टू सक्सेस. ठीक है, इन एकेडमिक सेक्शन.